We say the body is fully developed once it can reproduce, but medically, the evidence doesn't quite support that. Teen pregnancies carry significantly higher risk for both the pregnant person and the baby, specifically because the body is not yet physiologically mature. So the very milestone we use as a marker of full development is, by biology's own evidence, not actually the finish line. We drew the line in the wrong place, and it's been quietly causing harm ever since. I'm Dr. Robin Dickinson. I'm a family physician, and today we're talking about the peak of life myth. The idea that you hit your peak somewhere around 16 or 18 and spend the rest of your life managing the downward slope. You don't. Your biology disagrees, and I can prove it. I want you to think about the moment in human development that we treat as the finish line. Not the moment your brain finishes developing, not the moment your bones reach their peak density, not the moment your immune system fully matures or your social intelligence peaks or your vocabulary stops growing. The finish line we've drawn is, can you reproduce? The second your body becomes capable of making another human, we say you're done, fully developed, a finished adult body. Everything from here is just maintenance and eventually declines. And I need to tell you that this is wrong. Not just a little wrong, but makes people feel broken for decades wrong. When we teach human development in school, we teach it as a sequence. You're born, you grow, you hit puberty, and then at the end of puberty, the lessons stop. And there's a reason for that. In medicine, we actually have a staging system for puberty called Tanner stages. Stage 1 is prepubescent, and stage 5 is fully sexually mature. And stage 5 is where curriculum ends in school and often in how we talk about development in medicine and in life. The message is not explicit, but it's there. Stage 5 is the destination. You've arrived, fully developed. But here's the thing. Tanner stage 5 doesn't tell you much of anything. It's a sexual maturity rating. It describes reproductive development. It says nothing about brain development, bone density, muscle development, emotional maturity, cognitive capacity, or about 100 other things that are still actively changing in your body for years. So we took a system designed to track one specific kind of development and turned it into a general statement about whether you're done. And then we spent decades wondering why everyone over a certain age feels like a little bit like they're in a decline. So here's what that looks like in the real world. When I was a kid, I remember sitting at my mom's feet during one of her needlework groups and hearing one of the women say very matter-of-factly, well, now that I'm in my 40s, I need to be slowing down. And I remember thinking, why? Why would 40 be the time you slow down? My grandparents didn't slow down at 40. My grandpa died at 94, unexpectedly, I should say, on his way out the door to spend his day out and about doing things. The rest of the family was stunned. I was a doctor by then, so I understood how bodies work, but for everyone else, it came out of nowhere. He was just living his life. The woman in that needlework group had decided somewhere along the way that her best years were behind her, and she was in her 40s. That belief has consequences. Let's start with the brain, because this one surprises people. You may have heard that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles judgment, impulse control, planning, isn't fully developed until around age 25. And that's pretty true, and it gets talked about a lot, usually in the context of why teenagers make bad decisions. But we never talk about the rest of the brain. We stop the story there. The full story is much more interesting. Your brain keeps developing and reorganizing through your life. In your 20s, it's refining efficiency. In your 40s and 50s, research shows your social intelligence, your ability to read other people's emotions, to navigate complex relationships, and to understand what's actually happening in a room, that peaks in your 40s and 50s. People keep getting better at this. And that's not a small thing to be good at. It explains a lot about your 20s and 30s. And vocabulary and general knowledge, those keep climbing to your 60s, literally still accumulating, still growing. This isn't maintenance. This is development. Your brain is not in decline, it's adding. Now, let's talk about bodies, because one of the things that happens when we hold up the teenage body as the ideal is that every subsequent change feels like a failure. But a 30-year-old man who looked exactly like a 16-year-old boy would look unusual. We'd wonder if something was wrong. And a 30-year-old woman who looked exactly like a 16-year-old girl would also look unusual. The body is supposed to change. That's not decline. That's a next phase of development. And that continues. People who work physical jobs, construction, trades, farming, often describe something interesting. The young guys come in full of energy and confidence, and the guys in their 40s run circles around them. Because strength isn't just raw energy. It's efficiency, coordination, knowing exactly how to do the thing without wasting effort. That takes time to develop. It doesn't peak at 18. And yet our culture keeps telling people that the moment they stop looking like a teenager, something has gone wrong. Here's something that gets missed in the conversation about sexual maturity and peak development. We say the body is fully developed once it can reproduce, but medically, the evidence doesn't quite support that. Teen pregnancies carry significantly higher risk for both the pregnant person and the baby, specifically because the body is not yet physiologically mature. If stage 5 meant the body was ready for the full demands of pregnancy and birth, that risk difference wouldn't exist. The data says your body reaches a point where pregnancy is biologically possible and a different later point where it's actually safer. The 20s for most people represent that safer window. So the very milestone we use as a marker of full development is by biology's own evidence, not actually the finish line. We drew the line in the wrong place, and it's been quietly causing harm ever since. I want to spend some time on menopause because it's one of the most misrepresented biological transitions in medicine. In the framework of development peaks at reproduction, well, menopause can mean one thing: failure. The end of fertility, the body giving up, the cultural messaging around it has been relentless. Menopause is something to be managed, minimized, treated as a problem. The biology tells a completely different story. Now, there are symptoms to be managed, but menopause itself, for most people, is pretty good. The easiest way to understand perimenopause, the transition into menopause, is reverse puberty. When you were around 12 or 13, your hormones were shifting and calibrating as your body figured out a new normal. And then you have a few years of change in there. Perimenopause, which usually starts in the 40s, is the same process in the other direction. The ovaries are winding down their production of estrogen and progesterone. Things get a little unpredictable for a while as they do any transition, and then they stabilize. Menopause itself is just a marker. 12 consecutive months without a period. The reproductive years are over. And here's what the data actually shows about what happens next. If you're a woman who reaches age 50 in the United States, your life expectancy is 82. That's 30 more years. 30 years. Think about what that means. If you started counting your adult life, the one where you were like making your own decisions and building your lifestyle and living on your own terms, somewhere around 20, then the stretch from 20 to 50 is 30 years. And at 50, you have another 30 years in front of you. That's half your adult life, still ahead at 50. So think about everything that happens between 20 and 50. Maybe a career, maybe more than one, relationships that teach you things, friends who come and go and some who stay, places you live, things you figured out about yourself, often the hard way. All of that, the building, the first attempts at everything, the navigating, that's the first half. The second half looks different. You're no longer building your first career. You're not navigating your first serious relationship. You're not up at 2 a.m. with a newborn, which, if you ask me, sounds pretty good. And if you're one of the women who makes it all the way to 82, those women live another 8 or 9 years beyond that, on average. And if we plan for those years to be available for living, we can make the most of them. Your biology knows this, which is why I want to tell you about the grandmother hypothesis, a concept in evolutionary biology. In most species, females remain fertile until they die. Humans and a few other species are unusual. Women have a long post-reproductive life. For decades, evolutionary biologists, mostly men, were perplexed by this because they were so focused on what standard sex ed had taught them, that the goal is reproduction. And if the purpose of biology is to pass on the genes, why would a body that can no longer reproduce keep living? Men, of course, can keep reproducing, so they have a purpose. But the grandmother hypothesis says because grandmothers are extraordinarily valuable, after menopause, women are freed to pour their energy into their children's children and their community. Historically, this meant gathering food, providing childcare, sharing knowledge with their people, supporting their daughters through the enormous physical demands of early parenthood. Research in traditional societies shows that the presence of a maternal grandmother is one of the strongest predictors of child survival. Grandchildren with involved grandmothers are healthier and more likely to reach adulthood. By helping their grandchildren survive, the grandmothers are still passing on their genes, just one generation removed. This is not biology in decline. This is biology with a different job, a specifically designed, evolutionary preserved, valuable job. The post-reproductive years are not an accident. They're a life stage. And nowadays, we aren't needing grandmothers to help gather food, but we do need each other for so many other reasons that have nothing to do with reproduction. And that is biologically meaningful. Let's talk about happiness, because the data here is counterintuitive to what many people think. If the peak of life myth were true, happiness should follow a steady downward slope from your 20s onward. Less youth, more decline, less happiness. But that's not what the research shows. What researchers have found across cultures and populations is what they call a happiness J-curve. Happiness is relatively high in young adulthood, and it dips during the middle years, the 30s and 40s, when most people are carrying the most responsibility, the most financial pressure, the most competing demands all at once. And then it rises again. You guys, I'm at the lowest point of this J curve statistically, right here, and life is about to get really good. Many people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond report their current years among the happiest of their lives. I think about this often. You can ask anyone in my family. I'm a bit obsessed with aging well. Not staying young, but getting old and enjoying it. I had a patient who came in to see me several days after injuring herself skiing. She was 83 years old. I asked her what brought her in. That's always the question, not just what happened, but why come in now, 3 days later? And she said, well, the first day I was still skiing black diamonds, so I knew I was fine. And then it was blue runs, and I was a little worried. But when I was thinking about sticking to the bunny slopes, I knew something was wrong. She knew there was a problem because she couldn't ski black diamonds at 83. Another patient's neighbor, this woman was in her 90s, went out ballroom dancing every weekend. High heels, swirling skirts, full jewelry, every weekend. My patient, we'll call her Helen, who was in her late 80s, used to complain that her neighbor did not act her age. Those are the women I want to be when I grow up, the ones who don't act their age. But let me tell you more about Helen, the one who wanted her neighbor to act her age. Helen was 88 at the time. She refused to use a walker at church because she didn't want people to think she was old. And I said, Helen, you aren't fooling anyone into thinking you're 20. But she stopped going to church. She stopped going places where people might notice the walker or the hearing loss. She refused to go to the various classes offered at her residence to help keep her sharp because she didn't want to admit that she might benefit from them. Her shame about aging, her belief that aging was something to hide, to fight, to be embarrassed by, kept her from doing the exact things that would have helped her. The peak of life myth, taken to its end, looks like Helen, shrinking your world down to avoid admitting that you're getting older. And the alternative, the clinical truth, looks like the woman in her 90s going out in high heels on a Saturday night. I had a patient, he was in his late 50s when I first saw him. He came in with the assumption that his body was basically done. Poor health, he thought, was just what getting older meant. I couldn't blame him. That's what he'd been told his whole life. We had a conversation about what low-hanging fruit looked like for him. Not a complete overhaul, not running a marathon, just things he might actually do. He liked certain vegetables. Those count, I told him. Vegetables you like are just as much vegetables as the ones you don't like. So eat the ones you do like. He didn't mind drinking sparkling water instead of soda. It was just a habit. He liked walking. He used to swim. He missed swimming. So he started swimming. He started walking. He ate the vegetables that he already liked. He picked up some hobbies he'd let go. A year later when I saw him, he was thinking about doing a triathlon, the kind with walking and biking and swimming, no running required. And his lab work was phenomenal. He told me, so much better than he had in years. 2 weeks later, his wife called me. He'd had a heart attack. He had bypass surgery. And afterwards, his cardiologist, his surgeon, his cardiac rehab nurse, every single person who cared for him said the same thing. If he hadn't made those changes in the last year, the outcome would have been very different. Because of the shape he was in, he bounced back. He went through cardiac rehab, and he got back to everything he was doing before. The blocked vessel was old, years of buildup, nothing to do with the last year. But the last year is what got him through it. His body wasn't over the hill. It was still responding, still adapting, still worth investing in. At 58, 59, 60, that's the clinical truth. I want to be honest with you about what aging does involve, because I'm not trying to sell you on the idea that everything gets better forever with no trade-offs. My neck seizes up if I sleep funny, my back goes out periodically for no reason I've been able to identify, I can't digest as well as I once did. These things happen. The clinical picture of aging is you trade some things. Some things get harder, some things get easier. Some things you valued at 25 matter much less at 50. Some things you couldn't access at 25, patience, perspective, not caring what strangers think of you, become available to you. Dementia is real, but it's not a normal outcome of aging. The majority of people stay cognitively sharp and engaged their whole lives. Most older people live at home independently in their communities. The nursing home is not the default destination, and it is not inevitable. What is true is that the habits you build now at whatever age you are, movement, connection, sleep, staying curious, getting appropriate screenings, these are the investments in your body that you'll have at 70. Not because they prevent all decline, but because they change the slope of decline. And one thing I've done since I was in my 20s, which I fully acknowledge is a little bit unusual, is design my house and my habits for aging in place. I figure if I have a fully accessible home and set up patterns now, the church involvement, the knitting, the dog, the cats, the piano, the garden, those patterns will carry me, even if my memory doesn't, which is admittedly a very doctor way to think about it, but here we are. Here is the one thing I want you to walk away with. Somewhere in our culture, we drew the line around reproductive maturity and called it the finish line of human development. And then we spent the rest of everyone's life telling them that they were in decline. That line is in the wrong place. The biology says so, the happiness data says so, the grandmother hypothesis says so, the research on brain development says so. Every patient I've ever had who discovered that their body was still worth investing in, still responding, still capable of getting stronger, they say so too. So whoever you are watching this, you are not past your peak because there is no peak. Development isn't a race to the finish line. It's your whole life. If you want to understand what this looks like from the very beginning, from embryology through puberty, through middle age, through menopause and beyond, that's what Making More Humans is built for. It's a physician-led, clinically accurate curriculum in human reproduction for every age and every body. Explore the curriculum for free and watch your first lesson now at docrobinschool.com/truth. I'll see you next time. Take good care.